Hello and welcome to Written Words. Today's lesson is about the importance of being different, and the areas that we're going to explore are why being different is important, understanding cliché and when not to use it, and how to use language with originality. Writing is much more interesting when it's unpredictable. Describing things in the same way as other people have described them before is just not interesting. It's dull. It's been done before. Readers don't want to read it again. A phrase or even just a technique can be a cliché if it's been used so many times before that it's lost its impact, so it's not worth using anymore. For examples of cliché, take a look at fairy tales. The traditional wicked stepmother, the handsome prince, the beautiful princess. It's all been done so many times before, and we all know how the story ends. We know the handsome prince and the beautiful princess are going to fall in love. We know that the villain, whether that's the wicked stepmother or the big bad wolf, is going to be defeated, and everyone's going to live happily ever after. So how can we write our story in a way that is different? How can we find new angles to make the reader intrigued, to make the reader want to read on, to make the reader want to know what happens? Could the stepmother be the hero? What if the princess was the villain? Or maybe the prince might fall in love with a prince. In the story of Snow White is described as having skin as white as snow, cheeks as red as blood, hair as black as ebony. But that description belongs in that story. If a character in my story has pale lips, red cheeks and dark hair, I need to find a different way of describing them. Unless, of course, I want to make a deliberate reference to the very popular fairy tale. If my character is not Snow White, I want to make her sound different to Snow White. Think, for example, of a cloud. Clouds can be fluffy and white. They can be black and heavy and menacing and bringing storms. But all those words, all those ways of describing clouds have been used before. It sounds ordinary because we've heard it so many times. We've heard clouds being compared to cotton wool or candy floss. We've heard clouds being described as dark and heavy and menacing. Wordsworth had a really good idea, and he called clouds lonely wanderers. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills. It was a great idea, but Wordsworth got there first. So it's already been done, and we have to find something new. How many stories have you read where people lie on the grass looking up at the clouds, trying to see shapes in them? How often have clouds been used to reflect the moods of the characters in a story? It's been done before. So how can we approach clouds from a different angle? What if the dark clouds were actually the good ones, and the white fluffy ones were the bad ones? What if, instead of reflecting moods, they were responsible for creating them? Or we could just use different adjectives to describe clouds in a less time-worn way. Carol Ann Duffy's poem Valentine is an antidote to all the usual Valentine cliches. Valentine's cards are full of red roses and love hearts. But in Carol Ann Duffy's poem, she says, "Not a red rose or a satin heart. I give you An onion. An onion is not the most obvious Valentine's gift, and she does go on to explain in the rest of the poem why an onion is better than all the usual Valentine's gifts such as roses, hearts and kissograms. So writing that alters conventions and finds new ways of doing things is more likely to surprise and therefore interest the reader, whereas ordinary, uninspiring writing risks losing their attention. Our extract for this lesson is from George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones. It's quite near the beginning, and in it the author is talking about the cold, and he has some very interesting ways of describing the cold. For anyone who's read the books or seen the TV series, you will know that cold is very important in the story. "It was the cold," Garrett said with iron certainty. "I saw men freeze last winter and the one before when I was half a boy. Everyone talks about snows 40 foot deep and how the ice wind comes howling out of the north. But the real enemy is the cold. It steals upon you quieter than will, and at first you shiver and your teeth chatter and you stamp your feet and dream of mulled wine and nice hot fires. It burns, it does. Nothing burns like the cold. But only for a while, then it gets inside you and starts to fill you up, and after a while you don't have the strength to fight it. It's easier just to sit down or go to sleep. They say you don't feel any pain toward the end. First you go weak and drowsy, and everything starts to fade, and then it's like sinking into a sea of warm milk, peaceful like." So in this extract, Martin, amongst many other things, personifies the cold. He calls it the enemy. The enemy steals upon you. It burns, it gets inside you. He uses verbs to describe what the cold is doing to you, as if it was a person, as if it was an enemy fighting against you. But he also uses some interesting words and comparisons that aren't usually associated with cold. He uses words and phrases that are usually associated with warmth. He says the cold burns. And he says it's like sinking into a sea of warm milk, which is not how you usually describe the cold, because it gets inside you, it changes your senses, it makes you think it's warm even though it's cold. Garrett, the character who is speaking, uses some colloquial language. So from this we can guess that perhaps he's not particularly intellectual, perhaps he's not an aristocratic character. What clues can we find in this passage that tell us that? For example, he uses the expression 40 foot. In correct English, he should say 40 feet, but he says 40 foot. And he talks about being half a boy. What does that mean, really? He means when he was younger, half a boy. And he uses, in the last part of the extract, he says peaceful like. Like doesn't really mean anything here. It's not used as a comparison. It's not peaceful like something else. It's just a colloquial turn of speech. Martin uses the word it's in this extract, and it's is something to be very careful with when you are writing. There are two kinds of it's. You can have it's with an apostrophe or it's without an apostrophe, and that tiny little speck of black that is the apostrophe changes the meaning. If you use it's with the apostrophe, it is the same as saying it is. The apostrophe just means that there's a letter missing, the I of is. So, for example, in this extract, Martin says, it's easier just to sit down. He means it is easier it is. It's without the apostrophe is an indication of possession. It means something belongs to something else. So if you say the dog wagged its tail, it means the tail belonged to the dog. Its indicates that the tail is the possession of the dog. Our writing prompt for this lesson is all about trying to be different. And it's a bit of a challenge, this one. Have a go at writing a paragraph to describe the moon. However, do not use any of the following words: bright, shine or shining, round, glow, light, night, beams, silver or glimmer. See if you can find some different ways of looking at the moon, different angles to see things from, and new ways of describing the moon. Do download the worksheet for this lesson, which contains the things we have discussed. Thank you very much for joining me in this lesson. I look forward to seeing you in the next one, and in the meantime, happy writing.